Hello and welcome to Spring Office Hours, Season 3, Episode 7, Spring AI. My name is Dan Vega, Spring Developer Advocate at Broadcom, joined by my good friend and coworker, DaShaun. DaShaun, how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. It's a great day to be a Spring developer, and I'm here for it. Let's go.
We're going to have some fun today. We have a special guest for you. He is not here. Oh, I already gave up half of it. He is here. He is here. He's just not on the stream yet. We just want to talk to you real quickly, and then we'll bring our good friend in. We'll tell you more about him in a second. DaShaun, what have you been up to? I haven't seen you in a few.
I know this is
well, at least here.
Yes, the thing is, this is like my favorite time of the week. And when we go a week, it was a holiday, I get it. But when we go a week without doing it, I feel like I'm not my complete self. I'm not my best self.
I know.
I'll say that.
I know.
So, yeah, I missed you too. I hope that your trip to Montreal was a wonderful trip.
Oh, that was awesome. Yeah, I was in Montreal, Canada for ConFu. First time going to that conference. Our good friends Spencer and Jonathan were there with me, so it was good to catch up with them. I met up with Anthony, who's also at Broadcom, who works on build packs. So that was a lot of fun. It was a cool conference. Really the best conference food I have ever eaten in my life. Most conferences, Spencer and I were joking around about this. Most conferences, I go to lunch day one and I say, okay, I'm not coming back here for lunch day two. I'm going to go eat somewhere else. This was like French cuisines every day for lunch, which was amazing. And then we had a really great speaker dinner that Jan put on at a steakhouse near there, which was amazing. And again, I think I tweeted this out when I was leaving, but I love conferences. I mean, the sessions are great, but it's just infectious to be around so many smart people. Like you get inspired to come back and like do something good. So yeah, I got back last week and off and running this week to get caught up on some things. So
that is
so how about
wonderful. You? So yeah, last week it was a lot of I'm working with a lot of customers, and that's always fun. Getting to hear like what's really happening, right? We can make releases all the time, but how is it being adopted? How are people taking it to production? That's the fun stuff. I really enjoy doing that. So that's what I did a lot of last week. And we had some really interesting releases last week as well.
Yeah. Speaking of, why don't we do that? Before we bring in our guests, we'd like to take a look at the calendar and just kind of get everybody caught up. If you don't know, calendar.spring.io, you can find out what releases are happening and when. So this is a really good place. Go ahead and bookmark this. I would save this, come back to it often if you're ever curious. So what happened? We missed some things last week, huh?
Well, we had new Spring Boot releases, which is great. Yeah, 3.2.3, which is where I'm at, came out on Thursday. And this hasn't been updated. I noticed just a second ago that we're kind of tagging the releases and stuff still for Spring AI. But Spring AI got released on Friday, the 23rd. So I'm sure this will be updated any minute. But that was the other really, really exciting part for my week was Spring AI getting released. 0.8.0 got released on Friday.
Yeah, and there was a really good blog post on spring.io/blog on like what's new in there. Yep, there it is. So go ahead and check that out if you want to learn about what's new in Spring AI. But we'll be talking about that today. And that 3.3 milestone 2 was out there. So that means we're getting closer to a 3.3 release, which is exciting. So a couple of months, not too long. So
in May.
Yeah, looking forward to that. So calendar.spring.io. If you're ever interested, go ahead and check that out. All right, enough of that. I think we need to bring on our guests and have a little fun today and talk about Spring AI. So right now I'm going to bring to the stage our good buddy, Craig Walls. Craig, how are you doing?
I'm good. It's Monday, so I'm only so good, but I'm good.
It's Monday. I don't know where you are right now, but the sun is out here, so I'm always better when the sun's out. So.
I'm in the Denver, Colorado area, and it's mostly sunny. Tomorrow it's supposed to snow.
Yeah, we're getting that, I think, later this week too, but I'll take the sun while I can, and it's going to be like 60 degrees tomorrow. So, hey, for the small corner of the earth out there that doesn't know who Craig Walls is, can you go ahead and give me a quick intro about who you are, what you do?
All right. I'm a member of the Spring Engineering team. I've been a member of the Spring Engineering team since 2010, so quite a while now. I am a big Spring fanatic. Obviously, I've written books on Spring, including Spring in Action, which is the one most people know about. Um, I'm currently working on a lot of the commercial stuff for the Spring team. Let's see what else. I'm also a big, and I can't say her name out loud because it'll hear me, but Alexa. I'm also like to develop voice apps for that thing that what used to look like a hockey puck. Written a book about that, in fact, and
Nice.
uh, enjoy board games and going to Disney parks. Let's see. So.
Yeah, you have been to a few Disney parks. In our conversations, I figured that out. When's the last time you were at a Disney park? How many days?
I was in Disneyland over Christmas.
Nice. So not too long.
Measuring it in still in days, not months.
Exactly. I got a quick question. The book Spring in Action, is it? It's on like the 7th edition. Is that correct?
The 6th edition has been published.
All right.
About half of the chapters for the 7th edition are in the can.
Cool. I'm always curious. So you come up with this book, Spring in Action. How does it go from edition to edition? Like, what is that process like for you? Do you have to like rewrite the entire book? Do you just like update certain pieces of it? How does that go?
Well, in the past, a few editions, yeah, it was a large rewrite. Partly because lots of things about Spring changed, like big time.
Yep.
Like, think back on the days of, early versions of Spring in VC, and what we knew in Spring 1 is vastly different than what we got in Spring 2.5, Spring 3.0.
Yep.
And that's even somewhat different today. But so back in the day, it required a whole lot of significant rewrites. Now I'm trying to get by with as what I can do to get things up to, kind of caught up with whatever the latest stuff is with as minimal effort as possible, and only spend the majority of my energy on stuff that's significantly new. So of course, in like this 7th edition, it'll be things like observations. It'll be some GraphQL, whatever's new, but not
Nice.
But not complete overwrite of everything else.
Excellent.
That's awesome. Cool. Looking forward to that. Do you have an idea when that might come out?
I do, but there's something that might put a pause button on that, but I can't talk about that yet because I haven't got everything fully approved yet. So
that was
right.
The answer I got when I asked, "Hey, when's the next edition?" He said, "I can't talk about that yet." So staying consistent. Very good.
Cool.
Very good.
So we're here to talk to you about Spring AI today. Now we talked about it before the show. You don't work on Spring AI all the time, but you're definitely really curious about it, really interested in it. How did you kind of get involved with just playing around with the project? What got you started with that?
Well, it was back at Spring 1 at VMware Explorer this last fall. I had known about nobody. I mean, who doesn't know about all the talk about ChatGPT and LLMs and all this stuff? I mean, how can you miss that? But I had heard about this stuff, but I hadn't really done much with it other than just kind of poke around with ChatGPT and ask it stupid questions and see what it gave me. And I was struggling to figure out, okay, that's cool and all, but how can you really use this? And when Mark was talking about Spring AI at Spring 1, I started tinkering with it, and all of a sudden it hit me like, okay, I kind of get this. And how this might work. There's also some little project I can't talk about really too much, but I can just kind of tell you a little bit about it. There's some stuff I was working with Alexa, and some other folks had been working with, and they were doing some interesting things with some of these LLMs behind the scenes. And it wasn't using Spring AI; it was using some other stuff. But it suddenly hit me. Wait a minute! I think I can see how this could be useful. And once you dive into it, you start seeing it's not just simply ask a question, get an answer. There's a lot of really interesting things you can do with it. I mean, that boil down to ask a question, get an answer, but there's a lot of cool things you can do. Like most significantly, the hot topic these days is RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, where you can ask questions about your own documents. It doesn't have to be trained on the LLM for you to ask questions about it. And so suddenly, once you could start doing things like that, I'm like, okay, now I could see how this might be helpful.
Yep. Cool. I thought before we get into stuff, I just want to say, everyone joining us here in the chat, if you have questions about AI in general or Spring AI, we'll do our best to answer them. If not, we can always ask the people that know this a little bit better. We can ask them. So if you're here in the chat, please go ahead and ask your questions. If you're not here in the chat, you can go ahead and catch this on a replay over at the Spring Developer YouTube channel. We also turn this into a podcast, so check out springofficehours.io, and you can get this podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. So that'll be fun. You can listen to us on the run, in the car, wherever you are. I thought it would be a good chance to kind of level set a couple of things, because when I hear AI, I hear like all these terms being thrown around, and I'm like, what is that? What is this? What does that have to do with this? So I think in general, we hear the term AI these days, and everything is AI, right? Like this app has AI and that app has AI. I'll leave this to both of you, DaShaun and Craig. Whoever wants to go ahead first, that's fine with me. But like, what is artificial intelligence to you?
Well, first off, AI is a very broad subject. There's a lot of different corners of it. And Spring AI doesn't cover all those things, and nor does what I'm interested in or understand go into all of those areas. It's a very niche corner of it called generative AI that we're interested in now.
Yes.
But in the more general sense, one of the things, even with generative AI, this is still applicable. I think the thing that everybody gets excited about is the word intelligence, but they forget that there's a word called artificial on there, and this is not really intelligence. It's pretending. It's no more a real intelligence than a plastic plant in the corner is a real plant. It's an artificial plant, but it can still exhibit characteristics of real intelligence, and that's kind of why we're excited about it. And so, I mean, in a general sense, that's kind of my thoughts on that. I'm very much interested more in the generative AI stuff, not so much on training my own models, although that's like maybe someday I'm going to play with that. But right today, I don't care. There's tons of people out there who are already doing that, and they're doing a great job. So I'll just trust that they're doing a good job. But at the end of the day, I think there's some really good stuff that can come out of this, as long as you keep in mind that it's artificial.
Yeah, and I wonder, I talk to a lot of people that aren't developers, right? And like, what is your thoughts on AI? And they think differently than we do, I think, right? Like they use ChatGPT, and it's like, wow, the machines are like progressing, and they're going to take over the world someday.
Yeah,
they're going to take all of our jobs, right? And it's just like we kind of understand, like, there's a big data set here behind the scenes, and it knows how to like process that, right? So I don't know, DaShaun, I'm curious, do you feel a lot like if you talk to somebody who's outside the development world, do you gonna get that sense that like AI is really advanced now and taking over the world?
First of all, I'm awkward. I don't talk to a lot of people outside of our ecosystem. But the other thing is there is a lot of concern, like, hey, what's going to happen? And I think the best way, oftentimes we hear is like, hey, is AI going to take over things? And the best way to kind of like keep in front is like do your own work, right? Do the development and figure it out, right? Go take it for a spin, because even if AI takes over the world, the AI developers are not going to be without a job, right? But the thing about AI, my perspective, is it allows us to tackle a lot of problems that we've had in the past in a different way. From the way that we built databases in the past, and the way that we interfaced with databases, the way that we queried databases, the way that we've all done prompt engineering before. It was the way that we would interface with Google, right? Just like, hey, how are we getting the right search query? And we're just we're going to be able to handle these large sets of data in a slightly different way, an easier way, hopefully, than what we had in the past. Like the way that we just searching, through data. There's going to be a lot of change coming forward, and we're just starting.
The funny thing is, you used the phrase prompt engineering. I think that's such a hyped term.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's, as you said, we've been doing this for years with Google. We just learned how to talk to Google, and anybody who's ever had a child, especially like a teenager, knows that you have to do prompt engineering, because if you don't, they're gonna come back and tell you what you didn't tell them.
That's awesome.
So you have to know how to ask the question and give the instruction correctly, or they're not going to do what you said.
You said pick the clothes up off my floor. You didn't say take them to the laundry.
Right.
So
that's why they're on the bed now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the other terms I hear a lot is large language models, or LLMs. I think a lot of this is like really ramped up over the last couple of years because of deep learning, large amounts of data, and really like fast processors, right? Fast computers. So it's kind of ramped up over the years. An LLM, is it just a large set of data, large language model? Is that just a big set of data that we're working with?
Yes. It's more than just saying that, but there's more to it than that. But you could say that, and that would be true.
All right.
Honestly, the internals of it, I'm still a little fuzzy on, but I have some kind of understanding about it.
All right.
But it's basically, it's just a bunch of data that has... How those models are structured, I still struggle with a little bit, because I don't know anything. I don't care.
Yeah.
But it doesn't impact my day to
right.
need to know. But it comes down to, there's these thoughts of where does this data exist in multidimensional space? And when you're asking questions of that data, what statistically is the most likely thing to follow that question? And this is why we call it, a lot of times it's not even called asking questions, it's called chat. Or not chat, I'm sorry, completions. Because it's not much different. At a simple level, it's not much different than what you do on your phone when you're texting somebody and it's suggesting the next word. It's just bigger. It's the same idea. What statistically is the most likely thing to follow what you just said? So when I enter a prompt and I ask a question or I tell it to do something, it's going to respond with statistically what's the most likely thing that's going to come back to match that. That's where the intelligence is lost. It's not thinking. It's just coming back and saying, okay, this is what follows that. And when it's based on a large enough model, the answers it gives sound like it's thinking. It sounds like it's giving you some real answer that it pondered over, but it really didn't. It just, here's what follows what that question is this answer.
Right. So then we have these large models, and there are companies building businesses on top of these models, right? Like an OpenAI, Google Bard, they all have their own models, right? So the way that we interface with these models is usually through something like a chatbot, right? So ChatGPT is the one everybody kind of knows. ChatGPT is talking to the model, right? Cool. So I think sometimes like you throw around a lot of these terms and we're not sure what's what. So the chatbot is talking to the large language model.
Yeah, the chatbot is just an application. That's all it is. But it knows about the model and knows how to submit those prompts so that it can come back with an answer.
And then there's ChatGPT, which is OpenAI. There's other ones out there, right? Can you name some other like chatbots that are out there?
ChatGPT is the obvious one. We all know about, what was called Bard. I think they're rebranding that under Gemini now.
Gemini, yep.
And what did I see? I saw one the other day and I was shocked to see it. In fact, I have it on my phone. Let me see if I can remember, because I had it. I was shocked to see it called what it was called. No, it's not there. I guess I deleted it. There was one. It was something I knew this company's brand as something else, but then it popped up on my phone as a different thing, and I was like, "Whoa, that's interesting." And it was basically a chatbot, but I totally blanking on what it is.
Well, AI is moving very fast these days. So, somebody brought something else up in the chat, CoPilot. So CoPilot is another form of this, right? But I believe this is talking to OpenAI's model as it is, right? Like, is it? I don't know if it's like the same model that ChatGPT uses, but there's a model underneath the hood that knows code, right? It's probably scanned like GitHub and the open web.
Excuse me, my chair is terribly uncomfortable. When people are watching me, otherwise it's comfortable all day long. There's different models out there that are more well tuned to provide help with coding.
Right.
And so, and actually that is the thing I was thinking of, is CoPilot. Because
Oh,
CoPilot I know is the thing I use to help me, not type as much.
yeah.
But then it showed up in a Super Bowl commercial as something that you can install on your phone and talk to it like Chat
Huh.
GPT.
Huh.
And that
Nice.
was like surprising to me that it showed up in that context.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you're talking about CoPilot that you have installed in your IDE, that's talking to a model that's more finely tuned for working. And there's different models out there that are just better at some things than others.
Yep. Yep. And it's the same thing. Like it'll predict kind of the next logical thing, right? Like, hey, I'm writing a recursive function to do this. And it'll go, okay, I can kind of figure that out based on the context. So
But anybody who's used it knows that the answers it gives you, the code it suggests is hit and miss. Sometimes it's
yeah.
great. When it works, it's awesome. When it doesn't,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, no, that's not what I want to do.
Yeah, most of the time too. And I do a lot of like demos where I've figured out the demo first. So I've written this demo. And then when I'm giving the demo in a video or at a conference in a presentation, it's right on because it's like using my code as part of that
Exactly.
completion. And that's great because like I know that that's right because I've already written that code.
I was surprised at one time I was doing a conference presentation and I was using IntelliJ CoPilot. And I don't think I'd ever given this example before, nor had I written it before. I thought, let me just do this kind of ad hoc or ad lib. And I did it. And as I was typing it, it was suggesting code that was very clearly from my book. I mean, it was obviously from my book.
Wow. Yeah. Well, you know that if you stopped writing books, then CoPilot would not have no more answers, right?
Right. This is how we kill the machine.
Yeah.
So the other idea around LLMs, right? You have these different LLMs that are trained differently, but one of the things that we're going to talk about here is like, yeah, how do you choose? How do you figure out what's the right LLM to back your thing, right? I'm doing a lot of like summarizing of videos, of transcripts, and there's definitely a different type, a different tone, different context, different things are prioritized, giving the same question to different LLMs.
So how would I pick? Honestly, the way I pick is what's cheapest, because I'm basically paying for this myself, and I'm cheap, and so I've gotten to where I started. I was using GPT-3.5 Turbo because it's probably the cheapest, most general purpose one you can get out there. And it's getting cheaper all the time. They keep dropping the price. As soon as I say what the price is, they'll drop it again. So maybe I should quote the price right now so they can drop it. I don't remember what it is now, but it's super cheap. GPT-4 is better, arguably better, but it's an order of magnitude more expensive. And so I don't use it often unless I just want to know how would it behave. And then I've been really excited about some of the other models that you can play with nowadays locally without having to pay a thing when I run them with Ollama. So Ollama is just a transformer you can run locally. You can load up pretty much any model that's out there into it, at least the public domain or the open source models, the stuff that is in Hugging Face and whatnot. You can install those. And so I've been playing with those. When I'm playing around with that, I use Llama 2. I've used there's another one I can't remember the name of now. I've used a couple of times, and more recently I've been using Gemma, which is kind of like the mini version of Gemini that Google's released. And Gemma is actually not bad, especially if you're using there's two versions, 2B and 7B. The 2B version's wonderful. It does a good job. I mean, not great, but pretty good. And it's fast. 7B caused the memory on my machine to peg out. Whenever I'd ask a question, you'd see the memory just go to the top, and it's slow. So I don't use 7B that much.
Excellent.
Cool. So Spring AI. So we can talk to. So OpenAI has an API that you could talk to and kind of work with their large language model, right?
Sure.
Google has the same thing. Microsoft has the same thing. All these LLMs have a way to kind of interact with it. But then along comes Spring AI. And what is Spring AI going to do for us to kind of simplify our lives?
All right. At the end of the day, no matter what you're using to talk to these LLMs, you're talking to a transformer that most likely exposes some REST API. And so the idea, to kind of sum it up, the transformer is just the thing that kind of make it simple. It makes it so that you can talk to these things. It knows how to deal with those really complicated mathematical models that have been trained. It knows how to deal with those in a kind of a human way to some degree, so you can ask questions of it. So I mean, that's
Nice.
oversimplifying it probably, but that's all you need to know. And then those expose a REST API. And at the end of the day, you're just talking to a REST API. And that's one of the things Spring is good at. Spring can do that because we have all sorts of different ways of doing that now. We have REST template and REST client and web client, and those are great. But when you're working with OpenAI or any of these things, with those clients, you're working with it at kind of a low level. And Spring AI at its very core is a API binding for these different models. And it knows how to talk to them. It knows how to package up the request with the proper stuff in it so it can send it right. And what's cool about it is that even though all these different models have different APIs that you would work with, when you're working with Spring AI, it's a common set of stuff you're working with. It's in many ways, I've heard people say this, in many ways, it's a lot like the old days, even now, but in the old days, we got excited about Spring Data for the same reason, because no matter what kind of database you're working with, you can still talk to it in the same way. And so Spring AI kind of unifies all these different APIs for working with different AI APIs, unifies them under one set of libraries.
That's what I've been saying. Are you okay with that explanation? Hey, I love Spring Data because I can go from Postgres to Redis to Oracle, and I have this layer of abstraction that I'm comfortable with, that I know, so it makes moving pretty easy, right?
Yeah, I mean, you might have to change a few things to kind of make that particular, in the case of Spring Data, that particular database happy, or to make this particular LLM happy. But for the most part, it's the same programming model. You don't have to completely learn something new.
And it's all the same types, right? All the types that we're working with when we're talking to one of these services, they're all going to be the same. So that makes it easy to think about when we're going across different providers, right?
Right. And then building on top of that API abstraction, we have all sorts of really cool things to help you do like a higher level functions against that. Things like you have things that can parse the response into output parsers, parse the response into, let's say, JSON, like a JSON response. And so when you ask for it, what you can do is pose your prompt, pose your question, tell it you're going to use a certain output parser. And what the output parser is going to do is, when you tell the output parser, you tell it, I want to bind this to this record or this Java class, this bean I want to tie it to. And the output parser does a couple of things. First off, it injects into the prompt the instructions that tell the LLM respond in this JSON format with this schema. And then once it receives that response, it takes that JSON and binds it to your Java object. So that you can work with it not just as text, but as Java code.
That's really cool.
Has stuff for working with, again, retrieval augmented generation. That's a big hot topic now. And so there's things in there that help you load up these documents from pretty much any source, PDFs or text files or what have you. Load up the document, store it into a vector database, retrieve it later on when you're ready to ask the questions, throw that stuff into a prompt, submit the prompt. And most recently with 0.8, you have the ability to kind of do it's same but different type of thing where you can ask questions about your data, your live data, through an API or through maybe hitting some Java bean. So if you have some bean that has some function on it, you can ask it a question, and that function is going to have some description on it to tell the LLM, hey, I know how to answer this kind of question, essentially. Yeah. When somebody asks a question, it comes back and tells you how to call that, but you don't have to deal with that. It just sort of calls it for you behind the scenes, and then you get an answer back.
Right. See, that's mind blowing. So you're saying I can ask a live running application against some beans that are exposed, like, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah. Yeah, and so the bean will have on it a description on a method saying, okay, this method, this answers this kind of thing, or this provides this kind of data. I did an example last week where behind the scenes I used an API that I've been aware of for a while that basically you can ask it questions like, what's the wait time for an attraction in Disney?
Oh, yeah.
And then so I declared a bean that knew how to do that. It was a function, just a Java util function bean. And it had a description on it that says this knows how to find wait times for Disneyland attractions or something. I can't remember how I described it. And then when I submitted my prompt, I said, okay, also, by the way, when you submit the prompt, keep in mind that we have this function here that we can use if you need it. And so behind the scenes, what happens is you go to the LLM along with that description of the function, and you say, what's the wait time for Haunted Mansion? And the LLM comes back and says, okay, well, I don't know that, but call this function with these parameters and it should give you the answer, and tell me what you get for the answer. And then it makes another call to the LLM with the answer. And then the LLM comes back and says, okay, here's the English sentence that describes what the answer is. But as far as from coding perspective, as far as it's concerned, you're just saying, here's my question, here's my function, answer this. And all that back and forth behind the scenes is handled by Spring AI. You don't have to do that yourself.
So I want to talk a little bit more about this RAG concept and when it might be useful. So I know one of the examples that you worked on earlier. So let's say that we're writing this kind of chatbot in our application. We're going to send a prompt to one of the large language models. Let's just say we're using OpenAI for this. We say, hey, what is the Spring Boot, what is the @Spring Boot application annotation used for? So we'd ask the LLM this, and it might come back with an answer of what this is used for. I saw an example where you took like your whole book as a PDF and fed this into Spring AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you do this, is there a way to say this is like my trusted source? That is like the secondary source. How does it know which one to like retrieve from first?
A lot of that has to do with the prompt engineering. You basically, to some degree, what happens is this is RAG. This is retrieval augmented generation. And what happens is, first off, you can't, well, it's not, I was about to say something that was not exactly correct. But in general, you can't send my entire book in your prompt.
Yep.
And there's a couple of options. We could train a model that knows nothing but things about my book. That's complicated and time consuming and expensive in terms of resources. Yep. Maybe you don't want to do that. Yep. You can do fine tuning where you can take an existing model and essentially add to it information about my book. That's also just as time consuming and complicated. Maybe I don't want it. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't know. There's different use cases where that might come in handy. But a vast number of use cases would simply be fine saying, here, hey LLM, hey OpenAI, hey Gemini, hey whatever. You don't know anything about this book, but I'm going to ask you questions about it anyway. But to help you, I'm going to give you an open book exam. I'm going to give you the book, and then I'm going to ask you questions about it. But this happens because there's no like memory between things. It doesn't remember what you told it. So every time I ask the question, I would have to give it my book. Yep. Well, there's a lot of problems with that. First off is that's just a lot of latency, a lot of data I'm sending on every single request when most of that is not relevant to the question being asked. So why should I send everything if I'm only asking a question about what is the Spring application or whatever annotation is used for? Yep. So why should I send the entire book for just that? It's also not possible to send the entire book with a lot of most models because you have a certain limited number of tokens, and tokens are like the way that these things are diced up, but you only have so many tokens you can send. Now with Gemini, you can send apparently 1 million tokens, that's cool that you can do that, but I'm still not sure that's a great idea because it's still, you're going to have to pay for those. You're paying per token.
Right.
And you still got a huge request. So I'm not, as cool as it is that you can do that, I'm not sure I want to. But regardless, so what you do is you take and you load up your document into a vector database, some sort of vector, something like, you can do it with Postgres, you can do it with Neo4j. Neo4j offers some really cool stuff, but you can do it with Postgres, you can do it with Neo4j, you can do it with Redis, you can do it with, there's some that are dedicated to these things like Pinecone and Chroma, and there's others that I'm forgetting right now. But what happens is you load the document up, and you don't load up the document as a whole. It gets chopped up into little like sub-documents.
Nice.
And it gets stored in there. And then what you are essentially doing is, if it helps you sleep better at night, it's text search, but it's actually better than text search. It's basically calculating where that thing fits within multi-dimensional space. Like multi-dimensional, like I don't even know how many dimensions, hundreds of dimensions.
The Matrix.
Makes your head hurt to think about it. And then when you ask a question, we calculate, these are called embeddings. When you calculate its position in multidimensional space, we call these things embeddings. And there's an API, there's APIs that help you do that. The OpenAI offers a model that's good at that. There's other ways of doing it. But regardless, you store this thing in a vector database with these embeddings. And then when you ask a question, your question turns into a set of embeddings too. And now you take those embeddings for your question, you go search the vector database for your what things are close to this question in multidimensional space. And it does it by doing, there's a couple of ways to do it, but the most common way is basically cosine similarity. It basically says, this question is at this point in multidimensional space. This document is at this point in multidimensional space. Starting at the origin, what's the cosine of that angle? And it's going to give you an answer anywhere between zero. Well, once you subtract it from 1, anywhere from 0 to 2. And so 2 means you're nowhere off. This document does not apply. 0 means you're spot on. This one does apply. And it's doing using this cosine similarity. It's going to provide a set of documents back, and you maybe 2 or 3, but not the entire book, just these little sub. And that becomes your context for the question.
Gotcha.
It's not perfect. There's a lot of problems you can have with that, but it works pretty well for most cases.
So I haven't used a vector database before because I haven't done anything with this. If I'm not supplying my own documents to use for search, do I still need a vector database, or is it just for this case where I'm providing some documents? Yeah,
I mean, it's really just for that case. Although, I mean, that is one of the ways that you can fight what they call hallucinations.
Yeah.
Hallucinations, I think, is a weird term, and I almost don't like it because it implies that basically the AI is on drugs or something. When in reality, the LLM is doing what humans do. If you were to come and ask me a question about some ambiguous topic, for example, the word Pandora, tell me everything you know about Pandora. Well, the problem with that is I know 3 different things. I can, without even trying, think of 3 different things called Pandora. There's the thing from the world of Avatar.
Yeah.
There's a jewelry company that makes jewelry. And then there's the streaming service. And without any other context, if you ask me to describe Pandora, I'm going to tell you the first one that comes to mind, and I'm going to describe that. And it's going to probably not be the one you wanted. And so the same kind of thing happens when you ask an LLM who's been trained on a vast amount of data, and you ask it a question with no context, it's going to come back with its best answer. The other side of it is it may just simply not know. And so you didn't tell it otherwise, so it's going to make stuff up. It's going to just speculate based on, again, then the speculation is not really a good way of putting it, because as I said earlier, it's not really intelligence. It's statistically what should follow this. And so for lack of anything else that statistically matches, it's going to find something that does. And it's the best answer it can give you, which is probably completely made up. And this is what hallucinations are. But when you start shoving your own documents into a vector database and you provide those as context for your questions, you can actually form the prompt so it says, hey, if it's not in the documents I'm giving you, just say I don't know, which means it's not going to do anything. Now, it may still take the documents you give it. It may still get a little bit confused on those and give you some wrong answers.
Yep.
That's less likely than asking a question that's based on a vast amount of information that it just doesn't know. It's ambiguous, or it just simply doesn't know the answer to.
Right away. Go ahead.
My other question here is this a good reason? So we know a lot of these large language models are only kind of trained up to a certain date. Is this a good use case for like, hey, I need to provide some information that I know the LLM doesn't have? Yeah,
that's a really good use case for that. I mean, a lot of them they're getting better at being trained more, current time, but they're still not like trained today.
Right.
And so if you wanted to know, ask something about the news from yesterday. It's
Yep.
just not going to know.
Right.
But you can feed it. You could basically use the newspaper, your local newspaper's website as your source of data, and then you
Yep.
could ask questions about that. It's also a good use of functions, though, because functions, if you're just looking for certain answers about real-time information, I don't necessarily want to load up a document every couple of minutes about what the current wait time is for Haunted Mansion. But if there's an API that just knows that real time, that's even better than RAG. I can go ask it using a function.
Yep.
This is like one of the early things, radar, signals we got was like, hey, we're using these services and we're sending all of our data to these third-party services. And shouldn't we be concerned? Right away with Spring AI, the first release or the first, experimental release, it had the ability to call some third party, but also I could give it a local URL and I could address some local LLM. What should we be thinking about when we're using Spring AI or other LLMs, public versus private? Thoughts?
I'm not sure how to answer that, but I'll try. As I said, RAG's not perfect. In fact, it's really bad if you're asking a question that spans multiple areas of a bigger document that's now been broken into smaller pieces. So when you're asking the vector database to give you, the top 2 or the top 3 or top 10, it doesn't matter if the answer you are looking for spans multiple of those things. Like you're asking, okay, how, what are the ways I can do blah? And that's covered in several chapters of a book. You're only going to get a couple of those things. You won't get the exhaustive list. So RAG kind of sucks at that. There's other ways of doing RAG that are starting to become interesting. There's one of them I'm not as well versed on, but it's basically self-reflective RAG, where somewhere along the way it sort of evaluates its own answers before you give it to the LLM. So what you get from the data store, from the vector data store, is evaluated, and things that are good are kept and things that are bad are tossed out before you go and ask the LLM. There's another one that's similar to that, and I'm totally blanking on what it's called now, even though I've actually done more with it. It's essentially the same idea, but instead you evaluate the documents you get from the vector store by, and you give them basically a grade. And there's different, you can give it A, B, or C, or you can give it relevant, not relevant, or neutral. There's different ways people will name them. And the idea is, in the case of if you call it relevant, not relevant, neutral, if it's relevant, then hey, we're going to use this document as part of our context. If it's not relevant, what we're going to do is not toss it out, but instead we're going to take that same question and maybe form a question based on what it did give us and ask some external source, which could be Wikipedia or it could be some other set of data. I don't know, but you ask something, some external source for some additional information. And if it's, but you toss out the answer it gave you, but you still go search somewhere else for it. And if it comes back with a grade of neutral, it means, hey, it may be good, but I don't know that it's good. Let's go ahead and search. We'll keep it, but we're still going to search some external source. And those are interesting ways of doing it. I've also seen, and I've taken interest in this recently, and by recently, I mean is Friday. So I haven't had a chance to try it much yet. But I've long felt that Neo4j as a vector store is intriguing because Neo4j being a graph database, you can have this sort of knowledge graph in there. And I started doing some reading about how people use Neo4j as a vector store, and they do something very interesting with it. Again, I've not done this. I've just read about it. So I'm just kind of echoing what I read, which could be dead wrong. I could have misunderstood it. But the idea is, before they load the document in there, they basically ask an LLM to summarize it and to perhaps provide a list of questions that this document answers. And so then, it's the list of questions that this document answers that's intriguing to me, because then if I store that list of questions that this document answers as documents in the vector store, yep, and then I ask a question and go ask me, okay, go find the question that I've previously generated that matches the question I'm asking now. If those are a really close match, then I just follow that graph down to the document that should give me the more details about it.
We are just scratching the surface. Yep. So there's a couple of good relevant questions here. asking if using RAG, we're doing full text search. Why don't we just use software like Solar, Elasticsearch versus the Lucene engine? And I think there's a distinction here. Vector databases, regarding the full text search, vector databases can store boatloads of information without the need for an exact search, a like or contains type of a search. We can have a lot more data in a much smaller space, and that's why the vector database has really taken off. But the question is like, hey, is that really a good example? Should we be using RAG just for full text search?
Well, I mean, first off, I know that the Solar and Lucene folks are working on making their stuff also available as a vector store. So you can actually, when you're doing queries, you're not doing text queries, you're doing vector queries. But there's a subtle difference. I said earlier that if it makes you sleep better at night, think of it as text search, but that's really not what's happening. It's better than that. It's because that entire you're not doing a full text search. You're basically looking for things that conceptually match with each other. And so a document when you create those embeddings, you're asking a model that's been trained on it that sort of understands that dogs and cats are two different things. And so when I'm searching for German Shepherd as a text search, it knows that I'm searching for documents that's probably about dogs. And in vector space, dogs, German Shepherd, Chihuahuas, whatever, those are all very close to each other in multidimensional space, but cats are somewhere else in multidimensional space, probably relatively close because they're still animals and they still have 4 legs. And where these multidimensions come down to things like that. Is it an animal or is it a rock? Well, that's one dimension. Or what color is it? Well, that's a different dimension. How many legs does it have? That's a different dimension. And so all these things have different aspects to them that define where they belong in multidimensional space. And so when you start asking questions about 4-legged animals, well, that matches cats and dogs, because that's in multidimensional space. 4-legged animals are pretty close to cats and dogs. So it's not just doing a text search, it's finding things that are relevant to each other based on characteristics that they have. And so that's better than full text search.
This next question, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask you, we've been talking a lot about chat, but we can also do other things with these models, right? Like images.
Oh, yeah.
I know you've been playing with images lately. What does that look like?
Oh, it's like chat, only you get back a picture, but it's really cool. I mean, everybody's probably used these. I mean, long before I was even interested in generative AI, I was using something called Night Cafe on my phone and generating images, and there's others people have used, and it's just cool. I mean, sometimes the images are funny and sometimes they're really awesome. Of course, now OpenAI has the ability to create videos, which are mind-blowing.
So cool.
I don't think Spring AI supports that yet, but the foundation is there to do that. That's kind of one of the things that came about with Spring AI being able to do image generation. Is it wasn't just that it was able to do image generation, because really Spring AI is not doing that. It's just the abstraction that's there is now laying a foundation for not just image generation, but also other types of generation, such as video generation or even speech generation. Because OpenAI does support a text-to-speech, has a text-to-speech API. And so Spring AI could support that, even though it's not in 0.8, it probably will be there someday. You also have the other way around, where you can take audio files and say, okay, give me the transcription of this. OpenAI supports that. Spring AI does not yet, but it probably will someday. I've got a really cool Spring Boot app that I wrote that it uses Spring AI for some parts, but not for that, because Spring AI doesn't do that. But where you can basically talk to an app, and you can basically, it's a web app. You hold down a button in your browser, you start talking, you let up, and then it sends whatever you said in audio to the server. The server sends it to OpenAI to get a transcription. And then it takes that transcription, sends it into a prompt to GPT-3.5, comes back with an answer, converts that into audio, and then plays the audio for you.
Craig, I could see the smile on your face. I could see that you enjoy this stuff just talking about it. So that's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, it's fun. This is like when I was a kid, this is what science fiction was. And now I'm building science fiction.
This is a question that I think one of the things that I talk about lately. It's like, hey, is there a simple way to export Spring references to one PDF like we used to have? Since changing to Antora, the single HTML has not been provided. So looking for that. And the reason why I think this is interesting is because your documentation today more than ever is super duper important
and up to date.
If we're pushing out Antora, we're using Antora to make our documents easy to understand and easy to consume. This is a very important part, and we have somebody in the audience asking that question right now. I want a single source so I can go and I can consume it and I can train. I can use it for RAG in my model, and I can put it into my workflow.
It's so funny that somebody asked this, because I was just talking to Craig about this probably 2 weeks ago. I said it as an example. I'm putting together a presentation of this. I thought of the example of using RAG, and hey, what if I fed it the Spring reference documentation? Because to me, that is the most up-to-date source of 20 years of Google searching, right? If you go Google search for how to do this in Spring, you get 20 years of stuff. But the Spring documentation is really up to date. And so that was my thought. If you go to spring.io and go to the project page for something like Spring Boot and go to the reference doc, at the top, it says this document is available as a single HTML page and a PDF. So you could pull down 975 pages of the Spring Boot documentation and feed that into it. Now, I haven't tried it yet. I don't know how it works yet, but that is one of the experiments that I'm going to go through. So it was funny that somebody asked.
It'll work pretty well.
Here's the thing, right? I already shared the link to Craig's demo. Why can't I find it? I already shared it. Here it is. I shared that link, and Craig's demo doesn't actually use a vector database. You're storing the content into a vector as a file, right? The simple vector.
That's the in-memory one. Yeah.
Yep.
I wouldn't necessarily do that for production, but it was a convenient way of doing it.
It's a great way to get a good example done. So you can actually go, and here I put the link to Craig's Spring AI RAG example. That is amazing. And this is the cool thing. You want to go show your friends. This is a great demo using Spring AI. You can basically feed it anything. You can give it a URL, you can give it a PDF, or anything that, what is it, Tika?
Supports? Yeah, it's using Apache Tika under the covers. So anything that Tika supports, in theory, although I've never been able to get this to work, in theory, you can give it like a WAV file or an MP3 file, and it'll get a transcript from that. That's big time in theory, because I've never been able to see that work. Tika says it does, but that's Tika saying that I've never been able to get it to work with this.
We'll have to take that for a spin. But this is just that idea, is that you can take this. So you could go and grab that PDF from the Spring IO website, and you can feed it in here, and you can start to ask it questions directly about Spring IO. So this is a great exercise for everybody that's listening. You want to get the latest and greatest examples, the latest and greatest insights, best practices. How do I do this in this version? Now you have access. This is just a great example.
I will warn you, though. I mean, Tika's great. Tika's awesome. But I have found examples where it just won't load a PDF. And I have one PDF in particular. There's a game I like to play called Burger Battle. And I have the rules for it in PDF. It refuses to load that. It does not. And I would think, well, Tika sucks, but actually I started trying to load it with other AI projects like LangChain and Llama Index, and none of them can load it either. So there's something about that PDF.
Yes. And we will talk about that, all the ways that I found over the years of taking what's in PDFs and converting it to other formats so that they can be.
That's what I've had to do, is I converted it to just flat text.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool. All right, we got another question here from Nicholas. What are some of the use cases you can see for Spring AI? I know you're doing just like a lot of demos and playing around with it now. Can you think of some like real world use cases where this might be helpful? This is Steve.
Well, yes, I can. And what's interesting is the one use case I dreamt up. See, we had no choice. It was my idea, but then somebody went off and started doing it themselves. We had no choice as a family to get a new vehicle. Our old, I can't remember what year it is, Honda Odyssey was just, it's on its last legs. And we still have it, but we have it so that my youngest daughter can practice driving and not to drive something that we were worried about. So we ended up buying a used car, but we bought a 2019 Infiniti QX80, which is sort of like driving the space shuttle. It has like we're still finding stuff that it can do that we didn't know it could do. It has all sorts of cool technology in it. And every so often, and it still happens, we would ask, okay, well, how do you do this? I mean, early on, it's like, how do you turn on high beams? We couldn't even figure out how to do that properly. And then we knew that it had automatic high beams that would just kind of turn themselves off if they saw oncoming headlights. We couldn't figure out how to do that. And so I loaded the 2019 Infiniti QX80 owner manual PDF into a vector store, and then I started asking questions about it.
That's awesome.
And it was able to give me answers on how to use our car. Now, okay, I'm sitting at my desk asking those questions is great, but what about if I'm on the road? Well, It turns out I have this really cool device on my phone called a Talk Socket, which you can't get anymore. They quit. The company that was making them went out of business. I have actually two of them. I have one on the back of my battery pack as a backup.
Nice.
But you can talk to Alexa with this. And so what if I put Alexa up front, Spring AI in the back, with a vector store that has my Infiniti QX80, then we're on the road and we want to know how to do something, I just ask. And a lot of cars now actually have Alexa built in. You can also buy like the Echo Auto if you don't have one in your car. So my 1993 Ford Bronco does not have Alexa built in, but I can have an Echo Auto and I can ask questions while I'm on the road about it. So I can do those kinds of things. I also have found it useful to load the rules, as I kind of hinted about, the rules for board games into it. And so while we're playing, I can ask a rules clarification question and get an answer. And that's kind of cool.
That's awesome. And I'm guessing car manuals are probably open. So here's a new business idea for someone out there. You can load all of them into a single app and start a new business here.
I actually went out and I built this for the QX80 and everything but tying it with an Alexa front end. I mean, it was all ready to do that. I just hadn't done the rest of it. And all of a sudden, I read an article about somebody out there. I can't remember who it was who was doing this. Oh, I remember. I can't say their name necessarily. I probably shouldn't say their name, but there's a company that's primarily interested in voice technology who is basically doing this now for auto manufacturers for newer vehicles.
Excellent.
Of course, it still doesn't help my 93 Ford Bronco, but
yeah.
I'm just smiling because you have a 93 Ford Bronco. Like, well done. Well
I can't share it with you now, but offline I'll show you a picture. That'll blow your mind. It's awesome.
One of the other things that this is top of mind, I haven't gotten very far with it, but the same example, I'm pulling in documentation from version 3.x of Spring Boot. I'm pulling in documentation from version 2.7 of Spring Boot, and I'm storing them into these models. And what I'd like to do is figure out, like, hey, how do I convert from old version to new version? As we go forward, we're going to be taking care of our software, taking care of our users, making it more maintainable. So using AI, in this case, Spring AI, to help with these migration concerns. Hey, how do I get from version A to version B? And identifying some of those things. This is one of the things that I'm really excited about. This is one of those things that as we improve our documentation, as we now have access, we can go back and hit the different versions of the documentation on our Spring AI website. This is really exciting that hopefully we can kind of develop this code using Spring AI.
Cool. So we're running up against it. I just want to kind of close out on one thing here. So Spring AI was an experimental project for a while, right? It was under kind of the experimental projects umbrella. It's since graduated. It's now under the Spring Projects umbrella. So it's out there. You can get a hold of it. But if you go to start.spring.io, this is not something you can pick as a dependency because it still hasn't hit kind of 1.0 yet. So how do we get started with Spring AI if we want to start using it in our Spring apps today?
Well, there is a story out there. There is an issue in GitHub to add it to the initializer. And they were saying hold off until 0.8, and so apparently either that's happened while we've been talking, or they just haven't got to it yet. I don't know. But someday, I'm like fingers crossed. I want that in there, like because it's not that the other way is hard. It's just I don't want to do it. But the other way is just simple. Right now, because it's 0.8, 0.8 is a milestone release, not a release, not a GA release. So you still have to add the Spring Milestones repository to your build. And then you add the dependencies, and you have to know what the dependencies are. And there's several different ones. So if you're using OpenAI, there's going to be a different dependency than if you're using Azure OpenAI, which is a different dependency than if you're using Olama. So you have to make sure you pick the right one, which is also kind of a challenge. You have to know that. That's where when you're working with the initializer, you'll have a list of checkboxes. You just pick the ones that look like the ones you're interested in. Of course, there's different dependencies for the different types of vector stores that are supported and things like that. So right now, it's a little bit of a pain. You just have to know. But to get started, I mean, there's a couple of different places you can look. Most recently, I tweeted how to do. I tweeted how to do a work with Spring AI and Gemma using Olama, and in that included in there was some of those details of how to set up your project. So,
Nice.
And in there, I think you used Spring CLI, if I'm not mistaken.
I do. At the end of the story, I did use Spring CLI. So if you have Spring CLI, I have a set of. I have a project catalog with some examples that I've written, and you can pull that down.
All right, so we did send out the link for the spring.io/project/spring AI. If you look in the reference documentation there, you'll see some getting started info with things like Craig was talking about there on how to get started with Spring AI. Craig, for those who want to be able to get a hold of you, how can we get a hold of you, keep up with all the things that you're doing these days?
Probably the best way to do it, I mean, in general, is on most of the social medias out there, at least the ones that most developers care about, like Twitter and Blue Sky and Mastodon. I'm just Habuma. At Habuma.
HABUMA.
HABUMA. If you forget that I'm or can't figure out how to connect with me, then if you go to habuma.com, that has like everything about me. That has videos
Awesome.
I've done. It has where I'm going to be speaking next and all that sort of stuff on there.
Which was my next question. I know you're going to be speaking next soon, right? At a conference in maybe Atlanta?
Yes. Yeah, DevNexus.
Awesome. And what are you talking about there?
Spring AI.
Amazing.
Well, there you go.
Amazing.
Awesome.
I'm
So
also
if you want to learn
a fixture on the No Fluff Just Stuff tour, and I'm scheduled to do some Spring AI talks there as well.
Perfect. So, hey, if you want to learn more, follow Craig and catch one of his presentations that he'll be delivering this year. Craig, thank you so much for taking some time to join us and talk about AI. This was a lot of fun, and I can't wait to do it again when I know a little bit more and I can ask some more questions. We'll have to do this again.
Oh yeah, of course.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
A lot of fun.
Thanks, Craig. And thanks to all the other 50 contributors so far to 50 plus to Spring AI. Thank you for your help.
Cool. All right. With that, we will see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Later.